My aunt, after the death of my parents, first kicked me out of the house and then called the police because, according to her, I stole $12,000. I'm Jacob, I'm 26, and I'm a CPA working out of Dayton, Ohio. Life's been sort of in limbo since my dad passed away unexpectedly last year. He had a heart attack right in the driveway after mowing the lawn. That was the day everything shifted. With no siblings and my mom already gone, I had nowhere to go but family. My Aunt Karen, Dad's younger sister, offered me a place in her home until I could get on my feet emotionally and financially. I was still grieving, and I figured a few months under a familiar roof would help me reset. She lived about 20 minutes from where I worked, in a quiet little cul-de-sac. It felt safe, familiar. Karen has a daughter, Alice, who's a year younger than me. We grew up more like siblings than cousins. Summers at the lake, 4th of July fireworks, even Thanksgiving dinner was always a joint family affair. So moving in with them didn't feel like starting over. It felt like returning to base. The house was nice, not huge, but 2 stories with a finished basement and an actual fireplace, which felt like luxury to me. Karen had a small home office downstairs for her remote HR job, and Alice had her own room across the hall from mine upstairs. At first, things were good. I paid rent, though Karen never asked me to. I insisted. I covered utilities and sometimes even groceries. I didn't keep track of it. It felt like the right thing to do. I was living there, after all, and it was family. You don't nickel and dime family. We settled into a rhythm. Dinner was usually around 7. Karen cooked a lot. She's one of those slow cooker moms who always has something simmering in the kitchen, and I helped clean up afterward. Alice, though, she started skipping dinners. I figured it was a work thing. She was doing online grad school while interning at a local marketing firm, and she always looked fried. I'd catch her coming in late sometimes, eyes puffy, saying she was fine and just tired. One night, I heard her crying through the wall. I knocked, but she said she just had a migraine and needed rest. I didn't press. We were close, but I respected her privacy. Weeks passed, then a couple months. Karen leaned on me more than I expected. At first it was just casual, asking if I could grab some milk on the way home or help fix a clogged sink. But then I was doing all the yard work, scheduling appliance repairs, even sitting through a plumber's 3-hour visit because Karen had a critical Zoom meeting. I didn't mind. Really, I like feeling useful. But Alice kept pulling away. No more movie nights. No more wine and card games on the weekends like we used to do. She stopped coming downstairs completely unless it was to leave the house. Karen said she was just going through something. I didn't push it. I just kept trying to be helpful. Family, right? Then one night in early January, everything flipped. I was in the kitchen, making coffee before bed because that's just my thing. Karen came down in a robe, hair wet like she'd just showered. She seemed off. I asked if she was okay. She sat down at the table and said, very calmly, "Jacob, I think it's time you found your own place." It caught me completely off guard. I asked what had happened, if I'd done something wrong. She said no, but that things weren't working anymore. I pushed a little, confused, and she finally said that Alice didn't feel comfortable with me in the house. I stood there, holding my mug, not understanding what she meant. She didn't want to say anything, Karen went on, but it's been building. The dynamic has shifted, and I need to prioritize my daughter's peace of mind. I felt like the floor fell out from under me. I hadn't even spoken to Alice more than a few casual exchanges in weeks. What had I done? I asked if Alice could talk to me about it. Karen shook her head. She's not ready for that. So that was it. I had 2 weeks to pack up and leave. I didn't fight it. I just nodded. I went upstairs, lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what the hell went wrong. It didn't make sense. I hadn't done anything. The next day, I came home from work early to start packing. Alice's door was open. She was sitting on her bed, laptop in her lap. She looked at me, but didn't say anything. I asked her, point blank, what was going on. Why she didn't feel safe around me. She blinked a few times, then said, "It's not about safety. It's just, I need space. You being here is too much." That was it. No specifics. No accusations. Just vague discomfort. I asked if I had done something to upset her. She said no. Just that things felt weird with me in the house. And then, like she'd rehearsed it, she added, "It's not personal. I just can't have you here right now." So I packed. I moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment near downtown. Not ideal. The rent's high, and the place smells faintly like someone's been microwaving fish nonstop for a year, but it's mine. I didn't hear from Karen or Alice for almost 3 months. Then, out of nowhere, Karen texted me. A friendly message, asking how I was doing, telling me she missed having someone to help around the house. She even joked about the faucet dripping again. I didn't reply. A week later, she called. Left a voicemail. She sounded almost cheery, saying Alice had moved in with some friends, and the house felt too quiet. She said she'd love to have me over for dinner sometime. Just like old times. I never called back. I don't know what changed in Alice. Maybe nothing did. Maybe I was just a convenient person to push away when she needed to feel in control. But after everything, after all the times I helped, contributed, supported them without keeping score, I was shown the door without explanation. Just a vague sense of discomfort. And now that I'm gone, they remember all the good I did. Of course they do. Funny how people only realize your worth after they decide they don't want you around. It happened about 6 months after I moved in with Karen and Alice. By then, I had settled into a kind of routine. I was still covering most of the utility bills and helping out with groceries. Karen had started relying on me more, and while our dynamic was a little strained after Alice's growing distance, I still felt like I was part of the household. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then came the day everything collapsed. It was a Saturday morning, gray and overcast. I was still in bed, scrolling through emails when I heard Karen shouting from downstairs. Not just annoyed or frustrated, full-on panicking. I bolted down to find her in the den, the cabinet open, papers all over the floor, and her face pale like she'd seen a ghost. The money's gone, she kept repeating, pacing in tight, frantic circles. $12,000. All gone. I didn't understand at first. She was pulling out drawers, throwing aside envelopes, muttering to herself. I asked what she meant, and she said she had kept the family emergency savings in a lockbox tucked behind some old photo albums. Cash. All of it in cash. I didn't even know she kept money like that in the house. I stood there, stunned, trying to make sense of it. Maybe she had moved it and forgotten. Maybe Alice had taken it to the bank. But Karen's mind was already made up. She turned to me with a look I had never seen on her face before. Tight, suspicious, almost cold. You were the only one who knew where it was, she said. The only one who ever touched the cabinet. I laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. I told her I didn't even know there was money in there. She didn't respond. Instead, she picked up her phone and called the police. I couldn't believe it. I honestly thought she was just panicking, that she'd hang up before it rang through, but she didn't. She gave them the address and said there had been a theft in her home. I stood there frozen, still barefoot, still in my sweatpants, as she calmly told them that she suspected a member of the household had taken the money. Alice came downstairs while we waited. She looked like she'd just woken up, rubbing her eyes, wearing an oversized hoodie. Karen filled her in quickly, her voice tight and shaking. Alice just stood there, staring at me, then at her mother. She didn't say a word. I kept looking at her, hoping she'd jump in, tell her mom this was insane, that I would never do something like that. But she didn't. She just looked at the floor. When the officers arrived, they were calm, professional, asked some standard questions. Karen did most of the talking. She told them that she kept $12,000 in a fireproof safe in the cabinet, and that it was gone. That the cabinet had no signs of forced entry. That only one other person knew the safe existed, and that was me. I told them I didn't even know there was money in it, that I had never touched the thing beyond helping her sort out old papers a few weeks earlier. One of them asked if I had an alibi for the previous evening. I didn't. I had stayed home, did laundry, watched TV, went to bed around midnight. Nobody saw me. I didn't even send any texts after 10 p.m., so even my phone logs were useless. They searched my room. I gave them permission. They went through my drawers, my closet, even pulled the cushions off the chair I used for gaming. Nothing, of course. There was nothing to find. But that didn't clear me. Not with Karen insisting I was the only one who knew about the safe. Not with Alice staying completely silent. I asked Alice again, right there in front of the cops, if she had said anything about the safe to anyone. She hesitated, looked at me, then shook her head. No, I didn't even know it existed. That hurt more than I can explain. The police didn't arrest me, but they opened a report, took statements, said they'd follow up. Karen handed over a photo of the cash. Apparently she'd taken one on her phone a few months ago after a big deposit. She even gave them the serial numbers of a few $100 bills she'd jotted down in a notebook, just in case. I didn't know if that was paranoia or prudence, but it made everything feel a lot more real. After they left, Karen told me I could stay, for now, but that she needed to process what had happened. I asked her if she really believed I'd steal from her. She didn't answer. She just said, I don't know what to believe anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I kept thinking about that look on Alice's face, that blank stare as if she didn't know me at all. I wasn't even angry yet, just numb, in shock, like I'd slipped into someone else's nightmare. I knew one thing for certain. It didn't matter that they didn't find the money in my room. It didn't matter that there was no proof. The damage had already been done. They didn't trust me anymore. And that's when everything really started to unravel. I knew the fallout would be bad, but I still wasn't prepared for how quickly everything would collapse. The whispers started almost immediately. First it was Karen's neighbor, Mrs. Daly, who used to wave at me every morning. She stopped. Then I noticed I wasn't getting replies from my Aunt Janice, my dad's sister, who I'd been close with my whole life. When I finally called her, her voice was flat, polite, but cold. "It's a terrible thing, Jacob," she said. "I just hope you find a way to make it right." I didn't even know what that was supposed to mean. I hadn't done anything. Then came my grandmother. She had always been my rock. Growing up, she was the one who baked those dry-ass oatmeal cookies I pretended to like, who gave me $50 for no reason just because you worked so hard. I went to her house like I had 100 times before, just wanting to feel normal again. But when I knocked, she opened the door halfway and didn't invite me in. She looked tired, like someone had aged her 10 years in a week. "Jacob," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You need to give people time. This is a lot to take in." I stood there like an idiot, holding a grocery bag with some fruit I thought she might like. She never even asked me what happened, just said she needed space. From there it spread. Cousins stopped liking my posts. Family group chat? Silent. My uncle on mom's side, who lived 3 hours away and barely knew me beyond the occasional holiday, texted me, "We're praying for you. Hope you make things right." Make things right? What the hell did that even mean? But the real kick came at work. I was at the firm one morning, 3 days after the cops came to Karen's place, trying to stay focused, trying to bury myself in spreadsheets like that would make the world feel normal again. My boss, Greg, called me into his office. He wasn't smiling. He closed the door gently and asked me to sit down. "I've always liked you, Jacob," he said. "You're sharp, you're reliable. But the truth is, we've got to be careful about who we align with." I asked what he meant, even though I already knew. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair and said, "It's not about guilt or innocence. It's about optics." That word, optics, that was it. He never said I was fired, just that they were restructuring and letting go of a few junior staff. But I was the only one whose name ended up on that list that week. I knew exactly why. He walked me out with a tight smile and a nod. No handshake. No thank you for your service. Just me and a box of personal stuff I didn't even remember decorating my desk with. That afternoon I sat in my car for 2 hours. No calls to return, no work emails to check, just me and the awful silence of being unwanted. Every bill I had suddenly felt like it weighed 10 times more. Rent, groceries, gas, my phone bill. The lawyer I had to consult just to figure out if I was in real legal danger. I still hadn't been charged, but I was under informal investigation. Whatever that meant. The lawyer didn't come cheap. I tried to apply for a few jobs, but with the kind of work I did, anything involving finances, numbers, trust, one Google search made that impossible. The story hadn't hit any papers, but word had clearly gotten around. A small town doesn't need headlines. It just needs someone with a big mouth and a slow afternoon. Savings drained faster than I ever thought they could. I canceled my streaming services, started eating less, put off paying the last utility bill. I sold my Xbox, then my TV. Eventually, I knew I had to let the apartment go. I couldn't even make rent for that next month, not unless I started selling furniture or skipped meals for a week straight. I texted Rob, an old buddy from high school who I hadn't seen in years, but who always talked big about how he'd have my back no matter what. I didn't expect anything. Honestly, I figured he'd just ghost me like everyone else. But he surprised me, told me he had a couch, a ceiling fan that clicked constantly, and a roommate who might be weird about guests, but I could stay for a bit if I needed. So I packed what I could into 2 suitcases, left the keys on the kitchen counter of my apartment, and left. No forwarding address. No goodbye. The first night on Rob's couch, I lay awake staring at the water stains on the ceiling. My pillow smelled like beer. A spring from the couch dug into my back in a way that would turn into a bruise the next morning. But that wasn't what kept me awake. It was the silence from everyone I once thought loved me. The way nobody asked for my side. The way nobody even hesitated to believe I was capable of stealing from my own family. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was too empty. Too far gone. It had been just over 3 weeks since I lost everything. Since I left my apartment with my dignity stuffed into a duffel bag. Since my own family had turned their backs on me. And since the word thief started floating around like smoke I couldn't outrun. I was sleeping on Rob's couch, half eating cold pasta out of a Tupperware most nights, and avoiding mirrors because I hated what I saw in them. I was existing, not living. Then, one morning my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't answer it. I had gotten too used to ignoring calls, bill collectors, old friends who suddenly wanted to check in, and recruiters pretending not to know about the situation. But something about this one made me pick up. "Jacob?" the voice asked. I said yes, cautiously. "This is Martha Green. I live next door to Karen. I wasn't sure if I should be calling you, but I think you need to know something." I sat up straight. I hadn't heard that name in years. Mrs. Green had been Karen's neighbor for as long as I could remember. She was the kind of person who baked banana bread no one asked for and had binoculars for bird watching, which really meant neighborhood surveillance. She hesitated, like she wasn't sure how to say it, then finally said, "I saw Alice. That day, the one when the money went missing. She left the house around 10 in the morning with a large black duffel bag. I remember because I was out watering the hydrangeas, and I thought she was headed to the gym or something, but the bag looked heavy. I didn't breathe for a second. She didn't say hello," Martha continued. "Usually she waves or smiles. This time she just walked fast down the driveway, got into that red Civic of hers, and drove off." My mind was racing. I asked her again if she was sure about the date. She was. She'd written it in her planner that she had a dentist appointment that afternoon and remembered clearly that it was the same morning she saw Alice leave. I thanked her profusely. She apologized for not saying something earlier. Said she didn't want to get involved. Said it wasn't her business. But now, hearing what had happened to me, she couldn't stay silent. I hung up and sat there for a solid 5 minutes, staring at nothing, just letting it all sink in. It didn't prove anything. Not yet, but it was something. A thread. A piece of the puzzle that finally pointed in a direction that wasn't mine. That afternoon, I made the call to a different attorney. The first one I'd hired was good, but I couldn't afford his rates anymore. This new guy, Gary, was younger, scrappier, less polished, but he actually picked up his own phone. I told him everything, what happened, what I'd lost, and now this call from Martha. He didn't promise miracles, but he said we could file for a case review, especially if I could get a statement from her in writing. He helped me draft it. I went to Martha's house in person 2 days later. She made tea I didn't touch and signed the letter with a shaking hand. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said again. I told her she wasn't. She was helping me breathe again. We submitted the request to the precinct. Gary used every formal word he could think of: new witness, corroborating timeline, potential lead. The officer who took it nodded like he cared, but his eyes said otherwise. "We'll look into it," he said. "Give us some time." That was the problem. Time. Time was something I didn't have much of. My savings were gone. My reputation was wrecked. And even though I now had something resembling a clue, everything moved like molasses through a straw. One officer emailed Gary a week later asking for Martha's contact info. That was it. Nothing else. No interviews. No official follow-up. Just silence. Still, I had something I didn't have before. I had doubt, cast not on me, but on Alice. And that, for the first time in weeks, felt like hope. Quiet. Fragile. But real. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way Alice had stared at the floor that day. The way she hadn't defended me, not even once. And now, after what Martha had told me, the silence from both Karen and Alice felt heavier. Almost like guilt. Something wasn't right, and the more I thought about it, the more I became convinced that they knew more than they were letting on. That's when the idea came to me. Not something I'm proud of, but at that point, I was out of options. I knew they wouldn't talk to me if I confronted them directly. But maybe, just maybe, if I caught them off guard, they'd say something they didn't mean to. I sent Alice a casual text. Something light. Said I was in the neighborhood, and asked if she'd be willing to meet for coffee. No pressure. Just talk. To my surprise, she agreed. Said she could meet me the next afternoon at a coffee shop near her office. I borrowed a digital voice recorder from Rob. It was an old one, slightly scratched, but it still worked. I tucked it in the inside pocket of my jacket and made sure it was recording before I walked into the cafe. My heart was hammering the whole time. Alice was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with a paper cup in front of her and her phone face down on the table. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun and her eyes were distant. She didn't smile when I sat down. We made awkward small talk for the first 10 minutes. How work was going, if I'd found a place yet. The usual nothing conversation people use to fill space. I tried to stay calm, to keep my voice steady. I didn't want to scare her off. Then I leaned in a little and asked quietly, "Alice, I need to ask you something." She looked at me sharply, defensive already. "If this is about the money." I nodded. "I just need to know what really happened. I'm not accusing anyone. I just want the truth. That's all I've ever wanted." She didn't say anything for a moment. Just stared at her coffee, her fingers tapping the cup. Then, without looking at me, she said, "You don't understand. It wasn't that simple." My pulse jumped. I didn't interrupt. I let the silence work. She kept tapping her cup, then sighed. I didn't want to say anything, okay? But Mom was in trouble. She had debt. Like real debt. If they'd started digging into the house, into anything, they would have found it. They might have taken everything. I asked what she meant. She shook her head. She panicked. She told me I couldn't say anything. That we had to protect what we had left. I didn't know she had that much cash in the house until it was already gone. Then, quietly, So quietly I almost didn't hear it, she said. I didn't want to lie, Jacob, but I had to. If I hadn't, they would have looked into her finances. They would have come for her. I stared at her, trying not to react. My fingers were clenched under the table. She looked up finally and met my eyes. There was a flicker of guilt there, just for a second. I nodded slowly and said nothing else. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing at all. Then I told her I had to go. I left the coffee untouched. When I got back to Rob's place, I went into the bathroom, shut the door, and listened to the recording twice. Every word. It wasn't a confession. Not exactly. But it was something. A crack in the story. Proof that she hadn't been completely honest. That there was more going on than anyone had admitted. I sent the file to Gary that same night. He called me the next morning, and I could tell he'd already listened to it. It's not a direct admission, he said, but it's usable. Especially combined with the witness statement from the neighbor. It gives us leverage. For the first time in months, I felt like I was standing on something solid. Not much, but enough. Enough to fight back. The day court started, I felt like I was walking into a funeral. Everything about the place was sterile and gray, from the tile floors to the dull buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. I had never been in a courtroom before, and now I was sitting at the defendant's table, watching people I once loved line up to bury me. The prosecutor wasted no time. From the opening statement, she painted me like some kind of parasite. She called me the opportunistic nephew who took advantage of his aunt's generosity. She described how I moved in after my father's death, how Karen had opened her home to me during a time of grief, and how, in return, I supposedly stole from her and vanished. The way she said my name, flat, sharp, like she'd already convicted me in her mind, made my stomach turn. When they called Karen to the stand, she walked past me like I didn't exist. Her voice was calm, composed, almost rehearsed. She talked about how much she had done for me, how I had always been a quiet presence, helpful at first, and then how things changed. She said I was the only one who knew about the safe, that she trusted me, that she could never have imagined he'd do something like this. Then came Alice. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the desk in front of me as she took the oath and sat down. Her voice was softer than her mother's, but just as damaging. She told them she never knew about the money, that I'd been acting strange, that she felt something was off in the days leading up to the theft. No details, no hard proof, just vague impressions dressed up as fact. I could feel the weight of it in the room, the judge, the jury, even the bailiff. The story sounded clean, neat. A struggling young man, desperate, bitter, quietly taking what wasn't his. Everything about it fit their idea of how people fall apart. I could see it on the jurors' faces. I was losing. Then it was our turn. Gary stood up slowly and spoke like a man trying to thread a needle in the wind. He didn't argue with their version of events, not yet. Instead, he said we had new evidence, something we believed the court needed to hear. He explained where the audio had come from, how it had been recorded legally, and why it mattered. The judge leaned back, asked a few technical questions. There was a pause that felt like an hour. Then he nodded. Let's hear it. Gary walked over and pressed play on a small speaker he'd placed on the table. The courtroom went silent. At first, there was only the muffled background noise of the cafe. Chair scraping. A distant espresso machine. Then Alice's voice came through, soft and tired. You don't understand. It wasn't that simple. I felt my chest tighten. I glanced at Karen. Her posture changed. She sat up straighter, like she didn't know what was coming. I didn't want to say anything, okay? But Mom was in trouble. She had debt. Like real debt. She panicked. The room was dead still. She told me I couldn't say anything. That we had to protect what we had left. Someone coughed. A pen clicked. No one moved. I didn't want to lie, Jacob. But I had to. If I hadn't, they would have looked into her finances. They would have come for her. Then the words that cracked it all wide open, as clear as if she were standing right there in front of the jury. It was all for Mom. I didn't want her to go to jail. Gary let it play a few seconds longer, then paused it. The judge looked stunned, blinking like he hadn't expected it to go that far. The prosecutor stood frozen. Karen's face turned pale. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. Alice looked down, hands clenched in her lap. That moment, those exact seconds after the audio stopped, was the quietest I've ever heard a room full of people. Like the air had been sucked out of the walls. No shouting, no objections, just the sound of a story breaking apart in real time. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the only one who could see the cracks. I don't think I'll ever forget the way Alice looked when she walked back to the witness stand. After the audio was played in court, she had gone pale, like every drop of blood drained from her face. She barely made eye contact with anyone as she stepped forward. Her shoulders were hunched, and her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. The judge ordered a brief recess after the recording, But now we were back, and it was time for cross-examination. My attorney, Gary, stood calmly, adjusting his tie with the kind of quiet intensity I'd come to recognize in him over the past few weeks. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the table. He just asked one question, and it hit like a hammer. "Alice," he said, "is it true that you took the money from the safe?" She blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. The judge told her to answer. The prosecutor objected, but the judge waved it off. "She opened the door with her own words," he said. "Let her answer." Alice looked at Karen, who was staring at her like she couldn't believe what was happening. Then Alice looked at me, just for a second. There was something behind her eyes. Guilt, maybe. Regret. I don't know. But she didn't look away this time. She swallowed hard and nodded once. "Yes." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the stenographer paused for a split second before resuming her typing. Gary kept going, his tone gentle but firm. "Did your mother know about this?" Alice's voice cracked. "Yes. She was the one who told me where the money was." "Why did you take it?" There was a long silence. Then she said it, barely above a whisper. "Because we were drowning." She looked down, her voice steadier now but flat, mechanical. "Mom had debts. Credit cards, 2 maxed out lines of credit, even a payday loan. She didn't tell me until she got a notice that part of the house could be seized. We were out of time. She said she had savings in cash, but not enough. We didn't know what else to do." "And the plan?" Gary asked. "We were going to pay it back," she said quickly. "That was the plan. Take the money, deal with the immediate pressure, and return it before anyone noticed." But it didn't work. The bills didn't stop. The payments weren't enough. I could barely breathe. My jaw was clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. Alice hesitated, then went on. "When she saw the money was gone, Mom panicked. She said if anyone looked into her finances, they'd find everything. Bankruptcy. The house at risk. She said we needed someone to blame. Someone close. And you were already living there." She didn't cry. I don't think she had anything left in her. Her voice was hollow. She said it wouldn't stick. That you'd leave, and it would blow over. But then the police came. And then it just kept going. I stared at her as the words spilled out, trying to process what I was hearing. For weeks I had thought I was going crazy, questioning every memory, every interaction, every inch of trust one ever had in that house. And now here it was. The truth. Simple. Ugly. Clear. They had taken the money. Lied about it. Let me lose my job, my home, my family. And for what? To buy time they never had? Gary thanked her, and the judge called a recess again. The room emptied in near silence. I didn't move. I sat at the defendant's table with my hands folded in front of me, heart pounding in my ears, trying to remember how to breathe. Across the room, Karen was sitting with her face in her hands. And Alice just stared at the floor. Like maybe now she could finally see what they'd done. When the final verdict came down, I didn't even feel relief. I felt empty. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom like the final line of a story that had gone on far too long. He read the words slowly, carefully, like each one needed time to sink in. "All charges against Jacob Franklin are hereby dismissed due to lack of evidence and newly presented testimony." It was official. I was cleared. No jail. No record. No more hearings. It should have felt like a victory, but it didn't. I stood there next to Gary, who put a hand on my shoulder. I could tell he wanted to say something reassuring, but all he offered was a short nod. I think he knew. There was nothing left to say. Then came the sentencing for Alice and Karen. Alice got 12 months of probation and 120 hours of community service. The judge said she had shown remorse, had cooperated, and that her age and lack of prior offenses were taken into consideration. He reminded the court that while her actions were deceptive, they were not violent or malicious, and he believed she was manipulated by her mother. Her voice trembled when she said she was sorry, but she never looked at me. Karen's sentence was even lighter. She was fined $5,000 and ordered to attend a fraud prevention course. The charge was listed as administrative misrepresentation of financial records, which sounded more like a tax mistake than the thing that had destroyed my life. She didn't speak at all. Not to the judge, not to me. She just stood there with her jaw tight and arms crossed, as if the whole thing was still someone else's fault. When it was over, the judge looked directly at me. "Mr. Franklin," he said, "you have been through an ordeal no one should have to experience. You were accused without evidence, ostracized by your community, and nearly lost everything because of a lie. Legally, this court has restored your innocence. But I understand that doesn't come with compensation." He paused. "Moral victories," he said, "are not financial ones. And I regret that we have no mechanism here to reimburse you for the time, money, and dignity you've lost." I nodded once. That was all I could manage. He was right. The legal system gave me my name back, but it didn't give me my job, my home, or the thousands of dollars I had spent defending myself. Outside the courthouse, the sky was cloudy again, just like it had been on the day Karen called the police. The reporters were gone. The gallery was empty. No one waiting with balloons or hugs. Just me and Gary, standing on the concrete steps, breathing in the same cold air I'd tasted on the day it all began. I wasn't guilty anymore, but I wasn't whole either. After the trial ended and the dust finally settled, I thought maybe things would start to go back to normal. Not instantly, not all at once, but something in me hoped the truth would be enough. That the people who had turned their backs on me would at least have the decency to acknowledge they were wrong. That hope didn't last long. In the weeks that followed, I didn't hear from anyone. Not from my grandmother, not from Janice, not from the cousins I used to spend summers with at Lake Erie. No texts, no calls, not even a passive-aggressive Facebook like. It was as if I had become invisible, someone they had quietly agreed to scrub out of the family album. I reached out once, just to see if the silence was accidental. I messaged my cousin Sarah, who I used to be close with. We'd grown up like siblings, sneaking out during boring weddings and gossiping about everyone behind napkins at the kids' table. I sent her something simple. Hope you're well. Just wanted to say I miss talking to you. She answered 3 days later. We're all relieved the truth came out, she wrote. But honestly, Jacob, you could have handled it differently. Taking it to court, that was a lot. You aired everything. It embarrassed Mom and Grandma. You know how our family is. We deal with things quietly. Quietly. That word hit harder than I expected. Apparently, clearing my name wasn't the issue. The problem was that I made them all look bad while doing it. I tried to explain. I reminded her that no one believed me. That I lost my job, my apartment, my reputation. That I had begged Karen and Alice to just talk to me. I said I had no other option. She never replied. A few days later, I noticed I was no longer in the family group chat. Not muted. Removed. Just gone. I didn't get an invitation to Thanksgiving. No one asked if I'd be coming to Christmas. No more check-ins. No, hey, how are you holding up? Not even a forwarded chain text from my aunt with a dancing cartoon turkey. Total silence. It wasn't even that they still believed I was guilty. They didn't. Not anymore. The truth was out, documented, recorded, public. But in their eyes, I had committed a different kind of offense, exposing the cracks in the image, making them all look at what they didn't want to see. I'd always heard that families value loyalty. I just didn't realize they meant loyalty to silence, loyalty to appearances. Now when I hear from someone, it's usually through a mutual friend who starts the sentence with, "You won't believe what your cousin said about you," or "Your name came up at Grandma's, but it got quiet real fast." And then the same phrase, every time. They say it's just hard to look at you the same now. Hard to look at me. Not because I stole from them, but because I made them confront what actually happened. Because I made it public. Because I forced them to choose between being uncomfortable and being complicit. So now I spend my holidays elsewhere. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with friends who actually showed up when it mattered. There's no more pretending. No more polite small talk over mashed potatoes. Just distance. Cold, quiet, deliberate distance. I didn't lose my family because I lied. I lost them because I told the truth. Life didn't snap back into place like some rubber band. There was no moment of triumph. No cathartic return to normal. It just moved forward, whether I was ready or not. I got a job a few towns over, not in public accounting like before, but in internal finance at a mid-sized manufacturing company. The hiring manager didn't ask about the case, and I didn't volunteer anything. It was a fresh start in a city where no one knew my name, and for now, that was enough. The job paid less than what I used to make, and it came with fewer perks. No bonus structure. No company card. Just a paycheck every other Friday, which I stretched as far as it would go. Most of it still went to paying down the legal fees. I'd worked out a slow repayment plan with Gary, who thankfully wasn't the kind of guy to hound me, but the debt still hung over me like a shadow. Rent, utilities, groceries, and whatever was left went to whittling away at the mountain I never asked to climb. I still don't have my own place. I rent a room in a shared townhouse with 2 other guys. They're decent, quiet, keep to themselves. My room has a small window, a mattress on the floor, and a metal rack I use as a closet. It's nothing special, but it's mine. No one barges in. No one accuses me of anything. No one treats me like a placeholder for their mistakes. I've stopped reaching out to family, not out of spite, but because I've finally accepted that whatever we used to be doesn't exist anymore. The connection was severed, not by truth, but by the way they chose to handle it. Some people cut you off because they think you're guilty. Others cut you off because they can't face the fact that they were wrong. There are nights when the silence gets loud. When I remember birthdays I used to celebrate with them, the smell of Karen's cornbread in the oven, or the way Alice used to steal the last slice of pie and pretend it wasn't her. But then I remember what they did, what they allowed to happen, what they chose to protect instead of me. And still, I sleep better now than I have in a long time. Because for all the debt, For all the loss, for all the empty space where people used to be, I have something I didn't have during those long weeks on Rob's couch, wondering if my life was over. I have the truth. It didn't fix everything. It didn't make things right. But it pulled me out of the lie they tried to bury me under. And sometimes, that's the only victory you get. No confetti. No celebrations. Just quiet. And peace.